It's time to talk Gonzaga basketball.
Get ready.
Insiders Jim Meehan and Richard Fox bring you the latest games and standings for the Gonzaga Bulldogs on Gonzaga Basketball Insiders.
Well, hello and welcome back to the Zags Insiders podcast. We're back in the game again. We're off the bench. We're going to be with you the rest of the season. We're going to tape these on Monday. So look for a new show each Monday. Our starting lineup has changed a little bit, so let's introduce ourselves. I'm Jim Meehan with the Spokesman-Review. I've covered the Zags for about 15 years on the beat. We have Richard Fox, works for SWX, KHQ, Root, all the outlets, television outlets that show Zag games as a TV analyst. And we have Jesse Tinsley, our photographer for the Spokesman-Review, with many more talents than that. He's the only guy who could actually pull this together, the production of it. I'm obviously not the guy because I messed that up earlier today and cost my companions here about an hour that they didn't need to lose. So with that, is that accurate? I mean, Jesse's the only guy who could pull that off, isn't he, Richard?
I wasn't much help. So yeah, I would agree with that.
Hey, one thing I share with Mark Few, I probably couldn't coach a team like he does, but we're both challenged technologically, and me probably even more. So anyway, we're going to hit on all the news Zag-wise of the day and of the season, get caught up and look ahead. But first, let's kind of a little bit of an overview of the season. It's been a roller coaster for the Zags. They dropped to 14th in the latest poll from 6th with a loss at home to LMU last week. First loss, I think, snapped an 11-game winning streak. They'd won 75 in a row at the Kennel. So you have these close games that the Zags have been in on the road with San Francisco, with Santa Clara, with BYU, and a close game there that did not go their way. Richard, what did you see against LMU? That was a pretty sizable upset. I think the Zags are about 18-point favorites, and they just never seem to lose at home.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think just some of the issues that they've had throughout the year just kind of all coalesced in the same game. You know, they were out-rebounded by 9. In the second half, they really struggled to score. You know, Timmy got going, oddly enough, but, you know, as a collectively, they shot under 40%. And you see just the power of having a ball handler that can create their own shot late in games. You know, I thought Shelton was masterful, just controlling the tempo. I mean, they really slowed things down the last 7-8 minutes. And when you've got a guy who can either break somebody down one-on-one or can create a switch like we saw a few times with Timmy, and obviously the last shot of the game, he's able to get around and hit a shot with his offhand off the glass. You know, and just the rebounding, I think some of the inconsistency we've seen on the perimeter, you know, Bolton and Hickman were really good in the first half. And I think Hickman may have had a 3 late, which was timely, but that was the only bucket he had. And I don't believe Bolton scored in the second half. And obviously Julian struggled quite a bit throughout the game. And you just see the matchup that I think can create some problems, which is if you know, we saw against Pacific, they decided they elected not to double at all. But they didn't have anybody with any kind of size that could bother Drew. As a result, they had 38. But versus LMU, who's got Asanza and Graham, who both have size, who are both long and athletic, you've got a little more room for error if you're going to go that route. And I thought those two held up pretty well against Drew. And as a result, you don't have to help as much. You don't leave as many shooters open.
Yeah, I think you're right. It kind of underscores some of the things from the start of the season that we've seen. You know, rebounding has been an issue from time to time. Offense dries up from time to time if Drew isn't on, which he is on nearly every night, but he is human and does have an off night. And when teams have that size that can handle him, or at least try to handle him one-on-one, and make the other guys create their own shot, or the kick out isn't wide open, those kind of things. I think the Zags are still trying to develop the consistency around him. offensively. And then I think defensively, there's some things that continue to pop up. Defending Shelton and his ball penetration, whether it was a big or a guard, the guy was getting to the rim a lot. And I think that's been an issue throughout the year, and not just one single guard. It's kind of been the guard line, and which brings us to Pacific. That's what Pacific did. They went small, bunch of wing type players, 6'6", 6'5", handled it, could shoot it, and they really presented some problems, I thought, getting to the rim and hitting threes against Gonzaga's defense.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's hard at any level for a post player to keep quicker guys in front. I actually thought, oddly enough, Drew held up fairly well, either staying in front or at least forcing contested shots as those guys attack. But what it does is it does force help, and it exaggerates some of the deficiencies defensively for GU, because you maybe have to rotate over or dig down and try to help on that drive, and all of a sudden you're compromised defensively. But that's an issue for anybody. I mean, Shelton can probably do that against just about anybody in the country, but it's more about how hard is it for him to create those shots. And I just, that LMU game, Smith, I thought, had some decent stretches against him where he made him work. But generally speaking, Shelton was super comfortable kind of getting where he wanted to get. He was never rushed and getting to the shots that he wanted. And, he handled it so much. His turnovers were a bit high. But generally, I thought he was good with the ball. He made good decisions. And, against Pacific, with a team that, they shot 8 of 12 from 3 in the first half, which, as you know, is kind of the ultimate equalizer. They really struggled in the second half. I think 1 of 9. Yeah. So I think Gonzaga figured that out a little bit. I mean, the first half, they gave up a couple really easy, quick threes in transition or off of made baskets that they cleaned that bit of it up in the second half. And they probably won the game in the first 5 minutes or so, where they built that lead and that cushion, and they were able to weather a couple little runs from Pacific.
Let's kind of take a little broader picture of the Zags. As you know, you've been around here a long time, that when the Zags lose, it elevates the pulse rates, the heart rates of the Zag Nation. They've actually dropped 4 games this year, which, given their non-conference schedule, which was loaded, I think I went back through, they've run into 4 or 5 teams ranked currently, 2 more receiving votes, and a scrimmage against a team that's number 4 in the nation, Tennessee. They've actually played the number 1 and number 2 teams and split with those guys. So the notion that the sky is falling probably isn't accurate. The notion that the Zags are national title favorites is where they started the season at, I should say. That's probably not as prominent either. So let's get your sense. I mean, are they? Where are they in the big picture? Are they a national title contender? Are they a top 10 team? Are they a top 20 team? I mean, let's put it this way. The poll comes out, they're 14th. If they hit a bucket at the end of that game or get a stop at the end of that game, they're probably going to be 3rd or 4th in the country, right, with the teams that lost in front of them. So sky's neither falling, but there are some issues. Where do you see the Zags in the bigger picture?
Well, it's like anything. I mean, the truth's somewhere in the middle. I mean, I think coming into the year, I have difficulty considering them just a bona fide Final Four team, given what they've had in the past. And, this is a really talented group, and they lost to Baylor by 1 as well, LMU by 1. I mean, they've been in a lot of close games, and as you just talked about, I mean, the ball bounces a different way in a couple of those games. They might be number 3 in the country right now. But from my expectation or my thought is this is a Sweet 16 team that if they get the right bounce, all of a sudden you and I are having a conversation as they get ready for a Elite 8 game, or if they've got a bad bounce, maybe it's the second game of the tournament. Their room for error is just so much lower than what they've had in the past. And if you think about the rosters that they've had really since that Pangos Bell team that lost to Duke, but certainly that national championship team or the team that lost to Carolina in the national championship, and those rosters were all built to make a deep run. And they all had bona fide pros on them. And just the collective talent and I think polish of those groups was just higher than what we have now, where you have a lot of guys who are stepping into either completely new roles or trying to get adjusted to a new role. I think that makes it more interesting over the course of the year, but it tends to lend itself to some growing pains, and I think we've seen that. They're still searching for that second guy that's there every night. They just don't have that. As good as Julian is, he can have those LMU games where he's 1 of 6.
Yeah.
As good as Rasheer is, he can have those stretches where he struggles to score. And Hickman, sometimes I feel like he's caught in between wanting to deliver what it is Gonzaga needs as a point guard, but also satisfy or bring his ability to score. It's threading that needle is really difficult, and it reminds me a lot of Josh Perkins' first year after he broke his jaw, where there were a lot of growing pains. And I think Hickman is probably more polished than Josh was at the time, but that year Josh was trying to figure out, when am I a point guard and when am I trying to score? And I think we see that from time to time with Nolan. So this is a good team. This is a team that, if you and I are having a conversation heading into a Elite Eight game, I'm not going to be shocked. But if we're wrapping up the season heading into the Sweet 16 weekend, I'm probably not going to be shocked as well.
Yeah, I just think with who they've played to this point, and obviously in league, St. Mary's is now ranked 6th in the net ratings. They're going to get a couple more tests that way before this. They're going to get a lot more tests, but those two in particular, maybe 3. I think they're going to have some more battle wounds, some more bent and tight games to the end where every possession is huge. I think that helps them in the long run. It's maybe nerve-wracking for the fans to follow and watch, but I think that will help them. I think the one catch with this team defensively is probably the area that if they can shore up defensively, some of the things, the coverage on rotations, the being able to stop ball penetration, I think that's where their biggest area of improvement can come. I think offensively, for the most part, they're fine. They're not 2021. That team was a decades type team, a generational team on offense. But defensively, they need to find some answers. And where they're different there, for me, they don't have the size at the guards with Suggs or athleticism. Suggs or Andrew Nemhard, Joel. I mean, those are 6'5", 6'6" guys. They're smaller at the guard line, and they just don't have the aircraft carrier in there to block shots with Chet Holmgren going to the NBA. He had, I think I wrote this last week, he had 68 blocks at the 20-game mark of the season. And the Zags as a team had less last when they lined up against Pacifics, something like 63. Last year's team had almost double at this point. That's something that they can't replace. They're going to have to find a way without it. But as far as second options, they haven't had a consistent one, but they have 3 or 4 guys that can do that. Actually, right. Anton Watson is maybe been
he's been their second most consistent guy all year.
Yeah, he's so dependable in what he does, and defensively what he does. Very impressive. Well, let's move on to Drew Timme. He's on this march up the scoring list, rebounding list. I think he's right there with field goals in his career. He has had 3 or 4 30-point games, 38 the other night. He's taken over Michigan State. He's, I think, 2 or 3 games, he's just flat taken over in the second half. All the moves, all the scoring, all those things. I think what makes it more impressive is that, obviously he's tops on the scout, but he's playing 5 more minutes a game. And he's being required to do more defensively. They're trying to isolate him with guards up front. He's really having to work his tail off there. He's improved his rebounding, which is very important with this group. What do you make of his season? How he continues to deliver most nights out, and just what is being asked of him. I mean, the kid's carrying a heavy load.
Yeah, I think I said this earlier in the year. I thought about it before I said it. I kind of looked, kind of gone through the rosters and thought through. I don't think Mark's ever asked a player to carry more of a load offensively. As great as Kyle Wiltshire was as a scorer, he had DeMontis. As great as Adam Morrison was, he had Batista. And as talented as some of the guys on this roster are, they're just not that. We don't have the consistent scorer that both Sabonis and Batista were for those guys. He has to do so much. They have to have his scoring. As crazy as it is to say, you'd almost sometimes like for him to be more aggressive trying to score the ball because of how easy it comes to him. He's become a really good passer, both, in transition, making some decisions, and then high post, but also if teams do elect to double him, he's really figured out, where the open man was. There was, against LMU, I think Salas entered him the ball, and he kind of barked at Salas to get out, clear out. Of course, Salas does that, and he ends up in the opposite corner, and Drew finds him for a three. He just has an incredible feel. He's a good rebounder, particularly in his area, competes on the offensive glass. And then I think defensively, I think he holds up better than probably what he looks like. Mm-hmm. He's got good feet, doesn't have great quickness, but I think he's just such a smart player that even though he may get beat off the bounce, he just has a way of at least getting in the way enough to try to create a contested shot. So, I mean, no, I'm having to talk about it all the time, and I'm finding it difficult to find a new way to say that he's incredible. They've got Chicago State on the schedule randomly. I don't know. They could probably go ahead and retire his jersey then if they like. We all know it's going to happen. So, no, he's been tremendous, and definitely one of the all-time guys.
Let's take a quick look ahead and maybe scan the conference real quick as well. Zags are 6-1. That loss to LMU knocked them out of a first-place tie with St. Mary's. St. Mary's 7-0, number 22 in the AP poll this week. First time they've been in the poll since the end of last season. And then you've got kind of a 3 or 4 horses in the race trying to stay in that upper level and maybe even challenge the top 2 with Santa Clara, with surprising LMU. This is kind of the LMU team I thought would be last year. They waited a year on me, and now they're delivering. They're a handful. I think they're going to stick around. But you've got USF that kind of has run hot and cold this year. But at the start of the year, LMU and Pacific were the last 2 teams in the league. Now I think that's probably San Diego and Pepperdine. But right. I like Santa Clara, and I was really impressed with St. Mary's. I watched quite a bit of their game against Santa Clara and just controlled it from start to finish. That freshman guard, Aiden Mahoney, is very solid. They've got a couple of nice bigs, Logan Johnson, Dukas, Bowen. They're all veterans. This is not going to be an easy team to catch in this race, is it?
No, you're going to have to beat them at least once. So, no, I think the conference, we say this every year, and people say this every year, and I typically kind of scoff at the idea that the league has made some incredible jump or increased its depth. It's almost every year, or been about every year. It's either St. Mary's, it's always St. Mary's, Gonzaga, and depending on the year, BYU. But I do think legitimately this year, we saw LMU knock off Gonzaga. That's a team that can beat anybody in the conference, and if they can find a level of consistency, could go on a run. I was at that San Francisco game. They're really well coached. They've got a couple guards that can get their own shot. Maybe not as dynamic as Shelton, but still, I think the pairing of the two. And they've got big guys who know how to play. They certainly can beat anybody as well. Think about Gonzaga's schedule. You survive the road trips, but those teams get to come back up in Spokane and play. And this team just doesn't have that room for error, as we saw against LMU. So I would expect those games to be tight as well. So, St. Mary's, you drop a game, you're going to have to beat them. I think you knew that going into the year, though. And St. Mary's has a knack for dropping one that we all look back on and kind of scratch our head and
Well,
wonder how did that
BYU
come.
does that too. Every year it
Yeah.
seems like. Yeah.
So, Gonzaga is accustomed to being at the head of the pack, and St. Mary's has a lot of experience there as well. But it's a long season, and if I'm Gonzaga, I'm just thinking, let's just take care of what's in front of us. And the St. Mary's game is set. We know when we're playing them, and we'll be ready for that game. And in a weird way, I kind of like that they get to play them down there first, just to just kind of get the first taste of them and get a feel for what they play like. I've heard from people in the league that they think this is the best defensive team Bennett has. And obviously we know what they want to do offensively. They're very methodical. They can shoot it, but they've got some size and they've got guards that can really play. I'll be fascinated to see what the spread of that game is when we get there.
I'll tell you what, they are impressive defensively. What they did to the better guards in the league, Tyler Robertson, kid at Portland.
Mm-hmm.
I know he was just coming off an injury. I heard he probably shouldn't even have tried to play, but he's an Australian kid and he knows all the St. Mary's kids, and they shut him down. The kid from Santa Clara, Brandon Podjemski, who has made huge strides. I mean, he is impressive after transferring from Illinois. He got shut down pretty well by St. Mary's. So that team can really guard, and the thing is, they can guard inside and out. It's well balanced that way. So it will be very interesting. I think I looked it up. The most they've given up all season was 70 points in the season opener, St. Mary's. Now some of that's the slow tempo, the methodical offense. I think they held Houston in the 40s, number one team in the nation.
48. Yeah, well, Houston got 53 on them, but 53 to 48. Yeah. But and look, I mean, as good as they are, they lost to UW. They've lost to New Mexico. I mean, this is a team that can certainly be beat. But just to bring it back to your point about the defense earlier, Jim, I don't think there's any reason to expect this team to. I don't anticipate you and I describing that this has become a great defensive team in the next 6. But what they have to do is they have to become a good one on a night-to-night basis, and I think that's part of the challenge that they've had is that they'll have stretches where they defend, where they rebound, but then they'll go long stretches where that just isn't there. And if you're not a great defensive team, you've got to be a solid one, a consistent one. And I'll be interested to see as we kind of move through conference, do they just shore up that end, kind of bend, don't break, versus having these stretches or these games where it's just not there. They just don't, again, have that room for error. As well as they score, they just don't have the room for error. No,
and they can't do what they're doing in league. They've given up 78 a night. They're giving up 40% from three. I actually thought they would drive those numbers the other way, but they were higher in league for opponents than they were for the non-conference with, all those great teams that they played in the non-conference. You're right. If they can get that number back to 70, where they're not having to score 85 or 90 every night to win games, I think just marginal improvement on that side of the ball could be a game changer for them, not only in league, but where they're going to go eventually, because I think quite a bit of it hinges on their defense. But we'll take one look ahead here to Saturday's game against Portland. We mentioned all the teams, that I think Santa Clara, I think BYU, USF, LMU, they can beat anybody in the league. Portland, when they're right, and I've seen them right in the PK 85 down in Portland, watched them play North Carolina, watched them beat Villanova, watched them do everything but beat Michigan State. They can be a handful. They've got some perimeter shooting. They've got some bigs that can stretch it. Tyler Robertson, who I mentioned before, one of the craftier, more versatile players in the league. I think they've got Mike Meadows back. The Zags dusted them by 40 here a week or two ago, just scored at will. I think Portland continues to get healthier. They continue to be a little up and down. They had a nice win over USF, but they've had trouble backing it up sometimes. I think there's a reason to be concerned with Portland, especially there. But these are the type of games that the Zags are going to have to take care of on the road to get where they want to go. What do you see as the biggest challenge on Saturday against Shante Legan's crew?
Well, I mean, they shoot it well enough. 38%? That that's just that's the nature of the game now. If they can knock down shots in their home gym, it's going to be interesting for GU because they can score the ball.
Yeah.
I mean, they're averaging about 77, 78 a game, which certainly isn't where Gonzaga is, but on the right night at home, they can get going. They don't rebound it particularly well. To your point, they haven't been healthy. I think it's been hard for them to get some consistency out of that group. But when they're on point, they're really talented, and they've got some athletes. And Shantae's a good coach. He's going to. There's certainly Gonzaga's not going to see what they tried to put together up at the Kennel. It's going to be something completely different. I got a feeling that game plan was probably tossed in the bin. Was not working for them. But what's hard, Jim, is Gonzaga is just. I think especially as long as Mark's here, there's always going to be an aura about them. And they're always going to be the biggest game in town when you play them. But I do think the league smells some blood in the water. And there's a confidence that we've seen in some of these opponents where there's just not a lot of fear. Versus, when you've got Chet Holmgren up front and Suggs and, Karnowski and Collins, engulfing the paint, and, you've got Corey. I mean, it just – Gonzaga still has the most talent collectively, and is still the best team. But the gulf between them and the rest of the league, outside of maybe the bottom two, it's just not as wide as it was.
Yeah.
And so these games, going to Portland most years is, you expect it to be tight first 10 minutes, 12 minutes, but Gonzaga just based on, ABC is just going to pull away. There's just not much Portland can do. I still would expect Gonzaga to win, but they just don't have that room for error. Yeah. And if they go down there and they don't want to guard and they're not willing to rebound, that will be a game.
Another shootout coming. If that's
it's just that's why this game just isn't complicated. And if you're not going to guard and you're not going to rebound, Portland can beat you. Yeah. That's it.
And most anybody in the league, honestly, could beat them.
Yeah, and you could say, well, that's just anybody. That's basketball, and that's true.
Yeah.
But for this team in particular, if they don't want to rebound or they don't have it dialed in defensively, they can get beat. You would not have said that about a lot of the teams we've seen the last few years. Even on an off night, it's not a game.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think a lot of it hinges on that defensive side of the ball. And I think I wrote very early on, this team is not boring. They're not going to be boring, but they have the same high ceiling. But I think the floor is lower than it's been, especially these great run of teams they've had in the Sweet 16 every year. So, hey, that's going to do it. We're glad to be back with everybody out there on the Zags Insiders podcast. I apologize once again to my cohorts. Hopefully this will never happen again where I get waylaid technology wise, but with me, it's always a possibility. But anyway, you can find us on the Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google, and also the spokesman.com website for our newspaper. That way you can get the audio or video version. I recommend the audio only.
Me too.
I know you're a TV guy, so
I co-sign on that.
Okay. Anyway, hey, thanks for joining us. Catch us every Monday. We'll be back with you next week.